Are we smart? Do we know everything we need to know really understand ourselves and our rightful place in the universe? I know I don't. I feel I'm missing a bunch of concepts I'd need to know that. If we could come up with those concepts, I think it would make me a great deal smarter. Problem is, you can't come up with new concepts just by wanting to. We might not arrive at the missing concepts for hundreds of years. And until then, I've come up with an idea. We can't just invent the missing concepts, but we may be able to figure out where they belong to, where they're missing from. Knowing that might help us figure out what to look for. To do that, we need to know what concepts we've already got. To figure that out, I turn to how people used to study what the world consisted of before science came along. It was called natural philosophy. It could show us where our concepts today come from. To help me, I've come up with a set of counters to represent the major groups of concepts we've ended up with. If you'd like to play along, in the description for this video, I link to a PDF file you can print out. You can cut the counters out and arrange them any way you like. Here's how I arrange them. At one end, I put quantum particles and physical matter. Then I have life's origin, living creatures, intelligence, living creatures are intelligent. Then I have humans, conscious experience, beauty, aesthetics and creativity, morality, and the supernatural, God and the self, that kind of thing. To bring my collection up to date, I added the counter for quantum particles and for life's origins. Even if natural selection could account for how living creatures evolve, it can't account for how they originated. So that's still a bit of a mystery. To help me settle on this set of counters, I quickly ran through the history of natural philosophy, the various ways people have tried to account for everything in the world, the concepts we inherited. To show you how I use the counters, I'm going to do that again. First, I'll review concepts we inherited from the ancient world, then concepts from modern times. Now, I'm no expert on this. This is just to show you how I use the counters. I'll use them later to search for concepts we're missing. I begin with Greeks in the Hellenistic age leading up to Rome, the Epicureans. Above the counters for what people thought were the primary agents in the universe, I place red rings, like this, and red lines for how the influence of these agents spread. For the Epicureans, all that existed was atoms moving randomly in the void, making up everything else in the entire universe. Sometimes these atoms came together to form objects, then they might fly apart to become separate atoms again. Even the gods, if they existed, would be made of atoms. But atoms of a totally different kind, totally unconnected with the atoms in our world. So this was a purely secular system. But what about humans? The Epicureans' goal was to live quietly, absorbed in the appreciation of beauty, in the company of good friends. To give themselves free will so they could create and appreciate the sophisticated pleasures making for a refined and comfortable life, they claimed atoms could swerve, making them not entirely deterministic. This made humans a secondary agent. I've indicated this with a second paler disk. In Rome, the dominant belief became Stoicism. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic. Stoic believes all matter consisted of 4 basic elements: earth, air, fire, and water. But to account for how order and harmony were maintained throughout nature, they also subscribed to belief in a rational agent, a spirit of universal reason. The order and harmony in nature the Stoics called the macrocosm. This spirit, mixing with the other four elements, made crops and livestock fruitful. To humans, it gave an extra gift, embedding in each of us a portion of its own powers and wisdom, making each of us a macrocosm reflecting the microcosm. This is where we got our consciousness and sense of right and wrong. Doing what was right was all important to the Stoics. They judged that by studying what roles they were meant to serve in the macrocosm. The Stoics were, of course, supplanted by the Christians. Here the primary agent was, of course, the Christian God, who in one grand sweep created the entire universe. Except for humans. Us he created specially to worship him. So we could choose or refuse to worship him. He gave each of us consciousness and free will, along with a soul. If we chose to worship him, our souls would survive death to be with him in heaven. To learn more about him, we could study the natural world, which he had designed to reflect his majesty. For morality, he gave us the Bible. Now for the modern world. Here I begin with Descartes and his "I think, therefore I am." This convinced Descartes that besides his material body, he came with a second substance making up his conscious mind. Our body was that of an animal. Our mind consisted of consciousness and the impressions appearing in it. Dualism hasn't moved on much from where Descartes left it, except to suppose that mind might not be a substance, but a set of properties. Notice the question mark I've included somewhere around here. Descartes was unable to spell out how mind and body were connected. Progress in modern science resolved this problem by eliminating mind. Here is modern physicalism. Science showed so much promise of being able to account for everything else, it would eventually account for even whatever we attribute to mind. Confirming this, Charles Darwin came up with a purely physical process to account for how all living creatures evolved, including us. If even we human creatures had a purely physical origin, what independent reality could be claimed for mind? In reaction to this to restore mind, panpsychists suggest that all matter, starting with atomic particles, have a rudimentary degree of mind that augments in animals to become mind, and in us, consciousness. I've not created a separate display for that. It's much the same as for the atoms of the Epicureans. But another attempt to restore mind was called idealism. This presupposes there's some kind of universal consciousness over here somewhere that may or may not have created everything, including matter. The more important point was universal consciousness induced in each human and individual mind with consciousness. That's my quick summary of natural philosophy. Here's a view of all three ancient philosophies for quick comparison. And here's a view of the modern trio. I've included these images in the PDF file I linked to in the description. I've titled my video Natural Philosophy for the 21st Century. How well do you think my set of counters represents how we think today? I know not everyone's going to feel happy with it. Some physicalists will want the consciousness counter removed. They dismiss consciousness as an illusion or relegate it to the supernatural. But I think they have to accept that in not experiencing consciousness, they are in a minority. For most of us, consciousness is as real as matter itself, and they may have to take that into account and go along. I came up with these counters to help me identify concepts we may be missing. But could they become a foundation for a modern consilience? Could it provide a foundation we all agree on, from which we depart in disagreements? Could it herald a revival of natural philosophy? Please let me know in the comments what potential you think this idea has. And if you can think of people who might find it interesting, please share it with them. One way we could apply this set of counters is to identify places where we may be missing important concepts. In a second video, I'll try to do just that. When it's posted, I'll include a link to it in the description.